Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the Gospel of Matthew. We're in chapter 15 today, and we're going to finish chapter 15. We'll begin reading with verse 29. Departing from there, Jesus went along by the Sea of Galilee, and having gone up to the mountain, he was sitting there. And a great multitude came to him, bringing with them those who were lame, crippled, blind, mute, and many others, and laid them down at his feet, and he healed them. So that the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled restored, the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they glorified God, the God of Israel. And Jesus summoned to himself his disciples and said, I feel sorry for the multitude, because they have remained with me now 3 days, and have nothing to eat. And I do not wish to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. And the disciples said to him, Where should we get so many loaves in a desert place to satisfy such a great multitude? And Jesus said to them, How many loaves do you have? And they said, 7, and a few small fish. And he directed the multitude to sit down on the ground, and took 7 loaves and the fish, and giving thanks, he broke them, and started giving them to the disciples, and the disciples in turn to the multitudes. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 7 full baskets, and those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. Dismissing the multitudes, he got into a boat and came to the region of Magadan. So Jesus has left the area where he was speaking with the Syrophoenician woman far to the north and come back to the Sea of Galilee. And let us remember that although there was an enormous Jewish presence in the area, there was also a large Gentile presence in the area. And we're not sure what part of the sea, what side of the sea he was on, but if he went across to Magadan, which is an alternate spelling probably of Magdala, where Mary Magdalene is from, then he was probably on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, or the north side, and then sailing either west or southwest when he went to Magadan. He's in an area, he's up on the hillside, he's up in the mountainous area above the Sea of Galilee. There are commentators who want to say this is just a retelling, a different version of the feeding of the 5,000 story, but there are some very clear differences that make it clear to us that this is a second mass feeding, and that and we need to be reminded that it's connected to what came before it and what came after. We just had the Syrophoenician woman talking about, the house dogs, the pets, the lap dogs get to eat crumbs from the table. And then we have a story of Jesus providing a meal to everyone who needs it, and everyone being satisfied. And we're not told that this is a Jewish audience on the east side, of the Sea of Galilee. He's more likely to be among Gentiles than he is Jews. And yet he's healing everyone and feeding everyone. So there's a connection there. And then in the next episode, when he talks about the leaven of the Pharisees, the disciples, are worried about did we provision ourselves enough for the trip, and they don't get the message at all. So this is a necessary connection between the two stories. And then there's some real key differences. In the first place, the feeding of the 5,000 happened immediately after the disciples came back from their preaching tour. Jesus had been alone, and they needed time to really decompress with Jesus, and they are denied that time. Here they've been with Jesus all along and have had real quality time with Jesus, north and away from his celebrity in Galilee. He has spent the time not preaching, but healing. 3 days, mostly healing. I want to say something about the taxonomy, the vocabulary words, the different categories of healings that he has performed. We're not always comfortable with the words that are translated from the Greek, but let's remember that the gospel writer Matthew was just trying, he was there. He's trying to precisely describe the different categories of need that Jesus addressed. So if you're reading, you know, the word crippled or the word mute or the word even dumb for mute in some of the older translations. I hope that you'll not be offended by those vocabulary choices. It's not fair for us to apply our sensibilities to a first century source when the eyewitness is just trying to tell us who was there. And translators need to do a better job of being respectful. But of course, those terms change over time, and that's why we continue to need updated translations. One of the reasons, anyway. Another difference is that there's not this notion of 12 baskets full with the 12 apostles. We don't have the little boy. This is the food that they have on hand. But then we have the repeated pattern. He has everybody sit down. He says the prayer. He says grace before the meal. I hope you do too. I always do. And he gave the food to the disciples so that they could distribute it, so that they could be a part of this process where the gifts they are given by Jesus are given to be shared. Everyone in an orderly fashion had a meal, and they were all satisfied, and there were leftovers. Not 12 baskets, but 7. And we have this wonderful moment that is in no way spoiled by the people trying to make him a king, which is what happened at the feeding of the 5,000. One more note before we close out this conversation about this passage, and I want to talk about the number of people there. 4,000 men. Why were the men counted? I'm not sure, but the Bible makes clear, Matthew makes clear, these were not just men there. And if we have 4,000 men, we probably have at least 3 times that many people that were there when you count women and children. And especially if you consider that it would be more difficult for a man who is, most men are day laborers. If they don't work that day, they don't eat that day. Their family does not eat that day. Most men are not going to be even available to go hear Jesus. Of course, this is a crowd that has come for healing, and so you would imagine that they would take the time. But we are talking about a much larger crowd. Well, thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes. We'll pick up with chapter 16 next time.